Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is Laura Bonamici, who is the Global Head of Marketing for Fujitsu. That is a big title, Laura, and we're very proud and pleased to have you on the podcast. Now, this is amazing. You know, Fujitsu, it's a tech company, it's full of guys in suits, and you're the global head. You must be, if not the most senior female executive in this company. You must be one of a small number. Would that be right?
That is right. Yes, it is a small number.
Congratulations.
We're working on that.
Well, one of the things, as I explained to you in this podcast, I really do try and find senior ladies to have them on the podcast. Otherwise, just all guys talking from a guy point of view, and that's okay. That's all right. But I want to also have female voices. So having someone, as senior as yourself, fantastic. So let's go back a little bit. How do you go from wherever you were doing before to becoming, global head of marketing for Fujitsu? Give us a bit of the backstory and where you started, and we'll pick it up and start looking at your leadership experiences in Japan. So how did this journey start? Where did it start?
Sure.
Well, Bonamici is obviously an Italian name. Did you grow up in Italy?
I did. So I'm originally from Italy. I grew up in Sardinia, which is one of the main islands in Italy.
Which I've not been to. That's on my list.
All of that to look forward to then.
Yeah, that's on my
you
list.
should.
I want to go.
Yeah. Beautiful in every season. So, just pick the one that suits the kind of holiday that you want. So I moved to Florence after finishing high school, and then straight after university, I spent 10 years in London. I did my postgraduate degree there, and I was working at Goldman Sachs. And then at the end of that stint, I needed a break. So
you're working in investment banking, or?
Correct. Yeah, I did I split my time. I did a few years in the investment banking side, and then a few years on the other side of the Chinese wall in the commodity operations team. Great corporate gym, as I call it. Great way to start your career, to learn a lot of rigor. People have different opinions about investment banks, but certainly when you're starting, it gives you a kind of a strong foundation.
What's that expression? What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Is it one of those situations?
A little bit. Also because I was doing my PhD at the same time, so that was definitely a tough period.
So you're actually doing your PhD while you're working at Goldman Sachs?
Yes, I was doing my PhD part time and then working there. So
wow. I did my PhD full time. Just about killed me. So how on earth you did it part time? I don't know.
Yeah, it took a while, but I got there, and hence the break afterwards. I needed a bit of a break and a recalibration, and that's when I moved into communications initially, so public relations.
So why go from the sort of banking, hardcore investment, commodities trading, whatever, into communications? It's like you got the sort of where all the money is, basically. Goldman Sachs, there's a lot of dough there. It's a high risk, high return type of occupation actually, because things happen in finance, but. Why switch out of that into communications? Because it's really sort of the opposite side of things, opposite side of the brain too, I imagine.
It is, but so I always said that I had a job there, I didn't have a career, and I didn't want a career really. So I wanted a career in academia. So that was kind of my path up to that point. But then when I finished my PhD, I thought, is that really what I want? And so I took a moment. I took about a year out, and then I had the opportunity of starting to work for a PR agency in Munich, Germany. Very exciting. We were working with startups, Silicon Valley startups who wanted to come into the European market. I was focusing on Italy and Spain because I needed somebody that spoke both languages, and it was the renewable energy sector, which was very vibrant at the time. Again, another kind of mini gym in a different way because the pace is really fast. I was new. I remember in my first year I did 300 press briefings or something like that with one of our clients. So you learn a lot, but I also realized that I wanted to be on the inside of the tent, if you like. So I didn't want to be on the agency side. So I applied for a job at Fujitsu, and that's where the love affair started in Munich. And after 10 years, I realized I wanted to be on the ground. I think if you work for a Japanese company, you have to be here to really understand the company in its in its natural context, if you like, in its domestic market. So I moved to Japan then.
Too, it's a very hierarchical management system, and so all the key decisions are taken in the headquarters, I guess. I don't know to what extent they've succeeded in sort of pushing out decision-making to the local level, how much control you have outside of the headquarters when you're in Germany. But was there a sense of that the control was here in Japan rather than you didn't have enough control there?
It wasn't so much the lack of control. I was in the international marketing team at that point, and as a company, we wanted to globalize the corporate functions. That was the first step towards globalization of the company. So when we did that in 2019, the natural progressions to me seemed spending some time here to connect with the team, to connect with the executive teams, the ones that were based here, and to really help globalize the function. So it wasn't so much driven by feeling, outside the tent, if you like, but a desire to understand the tent a little bit better, if that makes sense.
I also guess too, I mean, for a lot of people moving to Japan is something like, wow, Japan, don't think I want to move there. Europe's, I know it, I feel more comfortable here. That sounds very difficult or stressful. I don't speak Japanese. I mean, I can imagine that probably only the hardy few, of which you're one, would put their hands up for an assignment like that, because Japan, I think for a lot of people, is seen as quite a difficult posting.
It comes with these challenges for sure. For me, I guess the curiosity was stronger than the fear of the challenge on the ground. Also, I don't know, I grew up with a bit of a fascination for Japan. I was a volleyball player, so, Japan had a big volleyball culture at the time. Yeah. I remember wanted ASICS trainers, at all costs and saving up for them and all of it. But again, I kind of felt that was the right move at that time in my career after 10 years, with the company. Easy, it's not. But I would say anything that stretches you and makes you grow is never easy. So,
was there a thought to? We talked a little bit about having more female voices on the podcast. Mm-hmm. How about having a few more female voices in the top echelons of management in Japanese companies? That's another aspect too. Did you think about that too in terms of maybe Fujitsu had a particular idea about globalization, about bringing in more women into the senior echelons too? Because a lot of Japanese companies you can enter. As a woman, you're sort of stuck, you're never going to make it up because you're just not a man, it's not how you don't have the patronage system, you don't have the connections, you don't have the gender requirement, and so that's it. But you felt with Fujitsu there was a way up.
Absolutely. I felt, I've always been very open about the fact that when our current CEO came on board and then a year later, the previous CMO, I was kind of on my way out thinking, okay, have I done my time now with the company? And then there was something at that point that felt like a real kind of accelerator in those first kind of 6 months. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give it another spin of the wheel. And I'm really glad I did, because the company that I work for today is a completely different company from the one that I joined back in 2012. And personally, I'm completely behind the direction of the company. Globalization is obviously one big objective for many Japanese companies, not just Fujitsu. There's a real push internally for, the female ratio of managers is one of our KPIs, or non-financial KPIs, and there's a real push there to help women progress in their career. And personally, I wanted to be part of that journey. I wanted to be one of the people that could help drive that agenda. So
that's good, because in Japan often I talk to female executives and they say that there's a distinct lack of role models, success stories, people you can learn from, trying to get some idea. And often they say that for men, if they only have 60% of the job requirements, they put their hand up for the job. But for ladies, anywhere in the world, it's 90%. And probably for Japanese ladies, it's probably 99% before they put their hand up. So they're sort of self-limiting, in a way, their career progression. And so I guess having role models, more female voices, seeing people stepping up helps you to take the step, have the confidence and put your hand up and try. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of leading, I don't know when you were working for Fujitsu in Germany, whether you had any leadership responsibilities there in the team, right? So you can contrast leading in Europe with an international team, I guess, with leading in Japan with a Japanese team, I guess, or a national team here. I'm not sure how that works, but what were some of the contrasts that you found between leading in Europe and leading in Japan? Now, you might work for a Japanese company, but you're in Europe. You come here, it's different. And so the way things work here, the culture of leadership, the culture of fellowship, it is quite specific. So what things when you first got here and you started leading in Japan, you went, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's different, or oh, that's better, or whatever it might be. What things sort of occurred to you a little bit, not unusual, but what you maybe hadn't seen before?
So you're right. It is different, and to some extent, I mean, leadership is difficult and different. If you take it seriously wherever you are in the world, perhaps a little bit more acute when you move to countries where you feel you are definitely other. Where everything feels foreign. As you described at the very beginning of our conversation. I guess there's probably 2 or 3 things that kind of struck me. So the first one, so when I came in 2022 now, I had a 15-minute meeting with our CEO, and his message was very clear. You're here to drive change. Which is, I was up for it, but I was also an island of one, in a sea of Japanese colleagues, and a big Japanese organization. So that tension between the push for transformation, for transforming companies, and then, but still having those norms, that are very much followed here in Japan. I don't know, consensus is one of them, reaching consensus. It takes a lot of time, like everybody talks about nemawashi and all of these things, it kind of goes in the opposite direction of doing, driving change fast. So that was certainly one that I had to come to terms with quite quickly when I came into Japan.
I guess Fujitsu is coming to terms with it too, because as you say, the nemawashi idea of basically lobbying decision makers for a decision, so they get to the meeting, it's a rubber stamp because it's already been taken, we'll agree, as opposed to a typical Western situation where you get in the room, you duke it out, and you debate, and you argue, and then you come to an agreement and you move on. So it is a different approach, but I guess for Fujitsu trying to move at speed, when you say the collaborative process takes time, even internally, that must be quite a struggle, I guess.
It's definitely a tension. And actually, in my case, because I manage a global team, that makes it twice as difficult because it's almost like operating at 2 different speeds. So here, everything feels accelerated. But outside Japan, for the team members outside Japan, everything feels slow. So how do you keep them in sync? So that's the biggest challenge, and the biggest difference, I guess, from managing let's call it an international team without Japanese members, where cultures are perhaps a little bit more in tune with each other in terms of how you want to progress. So there was definitely something else, and still is something else that is a challenge. I don't think these challenges go away necessarily after your first couple of months of realization. Language, in my case, I came for what was supposed to be 18 months. I will end up staying 4 years. Actually, using language as a working language is also one of our objectives. So I'm constantly piecing bits of information that come to me through translation, through memos, through moments where I finally get something. So that's a big challenge. I don't think
studying Japanese?
I am, and I think I reached a point where I can probably put words together. And if I'm really, really in trouble, people will understand what I'm trying to tell them. But I'm far from a conversation, and certainly from working proficiency.
Italian pronunciation, the vowel sounds, and Japanese vowel sounds are basically the same.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the Maori language in New Zealand is also the same. When I was studying here, I had some Kiwi friends who were also studying here, and they mentioned that they'd learnt Maori in New Zealand, and that gave them a little bit of an advantage in mastering those vowel sounds.
Okay.
For an English speaker, you got to work on it a little bit more. But, so that's an advantage.
That's a good point, because I had my final all hands call last couple of weeks ago at the end of March, and so I committed to making a little speech in Japanese.
Nice.
And everybody was really surprised and impressed because my pronunciation is really good. So, I can parrot anything you give me. But of course, day-to-day conversation is different. But what I find the lack of language skills obviously brings is 2 things. One, that you inevitably tune in with different things, with non-verbal cues. So you look at people's body language, how they respond, how they kind of sit up if something doesn't agree with them. And there's a lot that happens.
Easy with the body language. It's an extremely bad sign. They start sucking that air through the back of their teeth. This isn't going to go well, right?
Exactly. So that's potentially an advantage. And the other one is that it forces you to trust people. So you have to trust the interpreter that is your voice. You have to trust the team member that jumps in to correct the conversation. You have to trust the person who's proofreading the final version in Japanese of an interview that you gave answer to in English. So as a leader, that's a big leap of faith that you make every single day, multiple times a day. So I find that also, a challenge, but also an opportunity to grow, as a leader.
But I'm shocked at how good the translation technology is today through AI.
Yes, that's helping a lot.
I tried, Google Translate a few years ago, and it was crap, it was terrible. And I just gave up on it, But then, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, I for some reason, I tried it on something. I was shocked how good it was.
Positively.
I was like, oh my God, this is really good. It was an NDA agreement, non-disclosure agreement, and quite complex legal language. And I thought, we'll see how this is. I'm reading this, going, oh my God, this is pretty good, And it's just getting better and better. So I think for non-native speakers, accessing the written language, this is the big hurdle. Like, you meet some foreigners here who got quite good spoken Japanese, but they can't read. But now you can actually just pump it into the AI and you can get the translation. So that's where the tech is coming. Certainly coming. In terms of, did you have an existing team you took over here, or did you have to create the team here?
Existing team.
Existing team. Okay, so this is always a challenge. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you're coming in as you're the new person, they've all been here doing their job. They know Japan, presumably they know their business, they know their job, and you turn up. Who are you? So what things have you found works well to get people engaged to follow you as the leader?
I would say there's a lot of trial and error. So I won't lie, I haven't got the secret recipe for this. But you're right. When I arrived on the ground, they knew me because I'd been in a global role for a while. And the first year, which was just before COVID, I spent time here every 6 weeks. I was back, to kind of build that team that I inherited. So there was a one division within the team that I now lead. So there was a little bit of familiarity, but the reality is I'm very aware of the fact that I walk into a room, I'm the Martian, and what is the Martian going to say, so it's, I have to kind of, keep myself in check a little bit. That Japan is a culture that really values consensus. Group dynamics are very important. So when it comes to building the culture, for the team and getting people to trust you, so that collaborative approach is absolutely key. Last year, for example, we did at the beginning. It was my first year as head of global marketing. So it was we had a workshop with the leadership team, and we jointly defined our purpose, we jointly defined our values, and that's become, the leading light, if you like, for us. In general, to gain trust, the three things that work are humility, curiosity, and authenticity. Those are my three kind of, pillars of my strategy, if you like. And I always use the example of asking questions, which is very uncomfortable in Japan. So I come from the opposite reality. In Italy, I was always encouraged to ask questions, and it's something that we do. Here it makes people very uncomfortable. So I just wanted to make sure that they knew that it was coming from a good place, so to speak. And so I ask questions because I don't know something. I genuinely, there's a limitation. I don't know this topic. It's completely new to me. It's out of ignorance. So there's a certain level of humility that you need to be brave enough to ask that question.
So let me just ask you there. Why do you think there's a fear of asking questions in a corporate environment? So, you mentioned that you've got to be careful how you ask them, fair enough, but why? Why do you think there's that fear of you asking someone a question that they would worry about that?
I think historically there's a sense that, it's a combination of not wanting to embarrass themselves or saying the wrong thing or making a mistake. I think the education system, I've done a little bit of research, also kind of follows a little bit of that. Is more, imparting knowledge than creative, what we would describe as critical thinking, and questioning, which is something else that we are actively trying to encourage. So having the Martian in the room asking questions actually, makes everybody go, "Oh, she asked the question. I don't have to ask it." So it's a it can be a positive role. It gives them a bit of a breather, and then they listen to the answer that somebody else, had the courage to kind of to put on the table.
I notice it too when I in Australia, university and undergraduate degree, you have tutorials and you have a debate and you have a discussion and you have questions with the professor, and it's quite interactive. And when I was doing my master's degree, I was taking some courses, some undergraduate courses at Georgie, Sophia University. So I joined those undergraduate classes as well. And we'd have like a 3-hour lecture, professor speaking for 3 hours.
That's a long time.
A long time. And then you'd have this hour of that's what they call a seminar. Just professor speaking for another hour.
Okay.
And nobody asked a question. Like, I didn't have much Japanese in those days, but I'd ask a question in my terrible Japanese. Like, nobody asked a question. I thought, wow, this is terrible. Where's the intellectual rigor here? So you're right, when you talk about the educational system, it does not have that edge around, debate, challenging, asking questions, defending, emphasizing, bolstering, supporting, all that sort of stuff that we're used to. So they don't really have that. So I could see that. So what were some other things you noticed about getting engagement to follow you, the Martian, as the leader?
Well, using the question as the red thread. So the first one, as I said, showing humility. I don't know, I asked the question. The second one is curiosity. I'm a very curious person, so I ask lots of questions because I'm genuinely interested.
Now, on that point, do you set it up, for example, if we're in a Western environment, you would not hesitate. You would just ask me straight up, boom, you tell me. But maybe in that environment, do you set up the question and say, well, I'm going to ask a question in a moment because I don't have any great knowledge of this area, and I would like to understand a little bit better some of the key points here. So I'm going to ask Suzuki-san, could you explain a little bit more about why we in the past we chose to, do you set it up that way, or do you just go straight in and ask the question?
So instinctively, I would go in straight ask the question, but I've learned that scares many people off. So I try to put a little bit of context. So I say, I'm asking this question because, so it could be out of ignorance, it could be out of curiosity, or it could be simply because, I think it's important to stay true to yourself. And as I said, I grew up in an environment where I was encouraged to ask questions. And if I still didn't understand, if something didn't make sense, to ask the follow-up questions. So for me, that's a natural thing to do. If I stop doing it, then I'm not being myself. If I'm not being myself, I'm not bringing any value. So I try to put it into context. And after a while, they know what's coming. At the beginning, I think it was more intimidating than it is now. Now they're like, oh, here she goes again.
This is you in the environment of your peers or your seniors, and you're asking these questions, or you're talking about at the team level asking questions?
At the team level, I try to do it more, to your point about leading by example, because then I want them to feel that it's okay to ask questions, to
so
create
you're
that
mirroring
environment.
or modeling for them, this is how
Correct.
you ask a direct question, no hesitation.
Well, which probably you would have to, there's a few nuances when you're asking them. Probably with my peers, I could be as direct. I don't think there's an issue there. When it comes to the executive team, you have to be mindful of, there's still a culture of, being very respectful, towards, senior leaders, etc. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to be, straight and direct and ruin their career, in the process, there's different ways of achieving the same outcome.
Yeah, in the training business, we often want to ask questions of people. So sometimes, though, we'll ask people to write down the answer. In a moment, we're going to look at this question. So please take a moment, write down your thoughts on this. The reason we do that is because that, what seems from their point of view, perhaps confrontational, having a very direct question is quite threatening or challenging. But when you write it down, and then we don't ask them, we don't say, well, Laura, what was your idea? That terrifies the hell out of Japanese people. My idea, I've got to tell people my idea. People laugh at me, they'll think I'm stupid, a bad idea. Lots of self-doubt going on. We don't ask that question. We ask, Laura, what did you write down? And then they'll tell you. They have no hesitation to tell you what they wrote down. But if you said, what is your idea? ooh, they rear back and they just, ooh, I don't know if I can go on.
100%. And actually,
Yes.
I always joke and say, you'll be amazed at what a pack of Post-it notes does and a whiteboard, because it creates exactly that environment. So you feel safe, you write something down, you put it on the board. And only if somebody can't read it, then you get called in. It's like, who put that Post-it note? So creating that safe environment goes a long way. And actually, psychological safety is something that we've put a lot of emphasis on in the last couple of years. Creating that environment, because we know from science, from our own experience, that ultimately we learn best, we perform best when we are relaxed, when we are happy, when we're in a state of flow, right? So you have to create that environment. Otherwise, if everybody feels terrified, you're not going to get anything particularly exciting out of them. So that is one way. There's a lot of digital tools. There are many digital tools that you can use that serve the same purpose, basically. And when you do get the ideas and you get that engagement, so it's not that the ideas are not there. You just have to find a way of getting them out. There's a lot of talent here in Japan.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Leading is easy. Getting people to follow is the hard part. That is a great quote from Yogi Berra. Surprisingly, despite the complexities of leading here in Japan, everyone has to work it out by themselves. Foreign leaders want practical, applicable, expert advice. This is now available for the first time in history. Grab your copy of Japan Leadership Mastery on Amazon today and avoid the mystery, trial and error, especially the errors. What about getting ideas from bottom up? Because, in most Japanese companies, it's very hierarchical, but there is that bottom up process of due diligence around ideas, and, Nemawashi is a bottom up idea. So what have you found works well to get ideas from people who report to you to get them out on the table?
So I mentioned the magic Post-it note. So we do many, more often than not, workshops. We use design thinking as a way of kind of creating and generating new ideas. In general, I find that the big group dynamics are more difficult to really harness ideas. So we try and break out in smaller groups and then kind of reconvene, and then people are just sharing what was more comfortable to discuss in those smaller groups. We are making a distinct effort to engage I call them the future leaders, so the younger generations of leaders in the company. I also find that they're much more open to work in that way. They're less afraid of asking questions, and let's call it the generation that comes out of university into the early 30s. The current cohort. And then kind of injecting some of those people into other groups, so to kind of shake things up. So these things kind of work quite well. But what I found here in Japan actually was I hadn't appreciated that until I moved here, is that if you ask somebody how they're doing, typically they answer, "Oh, very busy." That's the answer. As if, being busy is a badge of honor. It's a good thing, something, equals contribution.
Well, tell your boss, nothing to do, just lying around, sipping martinis, waiting for the
of course
time to go home. You've got nothing happening. No one's going to tell you that, right? Anyway.
In any country. But, like here, there's almost like an association with, okay, I'm contributing, I'm doing a good job. And actually being busy and being productive is a very different thing. Being productive and being impactful is, again, another different thing. And that has been the mantra with the team. So we have to move from busy to productive, from productive to impactful. But if we're all busy doing things, it's very difficult to carve out time to think creatively. I mean, it's scientifically proven that if you don't allow at least 10% of your time, whether it's in the week, in the day, whichever way you break it down, for that, you're never going to get really great ideas. So again, how do we enable that with with our teams? That's so we've been working a lot with Agile. So there's in
that sense, do you ask people to, in their timetabling, to allocate 10% of their time for their own creative thinking? Do you have that like a mantra that, okay, you've all got a lot to do, we've all got busy days, you're all scheduling your time, but I want you to take 10% of your day, whatever that might be, and then, which for Japan is quite a long day, so it's probably like 2 minutes. But anyway, but to allocate some time for some self-reflection, a little bit of creative thinking, problem solution. Do you do that as a structure, or how do you get them to, or do you just create 10% of everyone's time and you say, right, we're having a session on this at this time every week, or how does it work?
So I'm very prescriptive when it comes to my own time. So I've actually got, I call them timekeepers, you know, and I've got them in yellow in my diary. So those are times that I try not to touch, because otherwise I just go from meeting to meeting. But when it comes to the team, no, I'm not as directive as that. You know, again, I try and share examples of how I try and maximize and you know, really make the most of my time. But what we do is we've introduced agile marketing, which is a subset of agile methodologies as a way of working differently, shortening, you know, some of the time that we spend on projects to allow for people to have more time. Technology is also helping. AI is kind of reducing time in many of the tasks that used to take much longer, so that kind of helps. But
it's shocking. It's shocking how good it is. What really irritates me about AI is, you know, I'll write something because I think I'm pretty good. I'll write some copy, and then I think, oh, I'll just throw that into AI, see what it can do with it. It comes back, it's much better. So, oh my God, look at this. That's much better than what I wrote. Very, very daunting to have that happen to you, you know. I thought my stuff was pretty good, but then you realise, there's another tool here that will actually do better than what you can do. So why not use it?
Yeah, and it does free up time that you were spending writing from,
well, you've got
scratch.
I mean, you do
prompt.
Yeah, you've got a bit of prompt tweaking, and you know, you didn't quite ask it the right way, so it doesn't give you the answer you're actually looking for. So you've got to work on that a little bit. But yeah, so that is something to think about. But anyway,
well,
yeah, please.
It's like the best recipes, you know. You need the good ingredients to get, you know, a good dish out of any recipe, you know. So it's the same with AI. So yeah, not as prescriptive as that, but you know, a bit of leading by example, a bit of creating different ways of working that would free up the time, and also, you know, ultimately doing lots of little different things every day to kind of change that broader mindset. I don't know if you ever change a mindset, but maybe you can influence it and change, you know, dynamics.
Well, you can
if
change
nothing else.
mindset. You can. We see it. We have courses which actually work on mindset change. You know, only one that does that, but it actually works. So what about, if we think, you mentioned before about, you know, coming in as the new leader and you're setting up, you know, you're talking about transformation, that's a pretty big deal. What about trust? What have you found has worked well in Japan in terms of getting trust from the team members in you?
It takes a long time.
Now,
in Japan and Japanese companies.
Why does it take a long time? I mean, it probably takes a long time everywhere, but it probably takes a bit longer in Japan. Why is that?
Yeah, I think in Japan, obviously I'm a non-Japanese leader, so let's start with that. So there's a bit of a perception that we come and go, so that we are not committed to the company in the long run, and I think that's changing in Japan. You know, we see a much more mobility, but of course it's not as extreme as other countries. So I always used to joke and say that unless you've done at least 10 years with a company, they, you know, they're kind of still watching you and say, oh, let's see if this one is here to stay, kind of thing. So you have to accept that it's going to take longer than perhaps it does in Germany or in the UK to kind of establish that trust. They need to know that you are committed to them first and foremost, to the team.
How would they feel that you're committed to them?
I do a lot of so there's a lot of one-to-one time that I spend with them, which is relatively new in Japan. You know, like the weekly one-to-ones were not a practice that was done in the past. And also I've started to be much more vocal about things. You know, where I think, oh, surely this person knows this, but I think, okay, let's take a step back. Maybe they don't. So I try and kind of take a little bit more time to explain things, which, again, sometimes you're under pressure, you know, you don't always have the time, but then you realize it was the right thing to do. So meaningful dialogue, you know, helps a lot.
It's always shocking too about your assumptions and expectations of what people know, and then we recently introduced two new leadership programs, on-demand learning programs, AI access to our IP, and you sort of think that people know what's going on, but then I was having my half-year performance reviews, and I realised, okay, I thought I explained all that stuff well, but I obviously haven't explained it well enough, and there's gaps and things are not quite lining up, and people aren't quite getting it. So I think in Japan you've got to, perhaps Japan, maybe everywhere, spend more time to make sure that your assumptions are actually correct.
Yeah, and also explaining things that might be obvious to you, but not necessarily to, in the same way that they do it with you. You know, there are things that for them are completely transparent, you know, they shouldn't be talking about it, but then, you know, they have to explain them to me because I just don't know. So I find that that helps, you know, building that kind of relationship. Of course, I've got a team of over 500 people. I can't do that one-on-one with everybody, but spending time and
500 people in the marketing department in Fujitsu.
Worldwide.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you had such a
we're a company of 124,000 employees. You know,
so I guess when you look at it in that sense, But I don't think too many people are saying, oh, yes, well, of course, Fujitsu's got 500 people working in marketing. That's impressive. And you're the head.
I am, and I'm the head, yes.
Kudos to you. Yeah.
It's a mix. It's a mix of HQ teams, which are kind of distributed, so not just in an HQ as in Japanese, and then of course the regional teams that are at the cold face with the customers in the
So what other things work well for getting trust?
So I've been doing, as I said, trial and error is probably the word. I've been doing things that work, things that didn't work.
What things worked?
What things worked? I find that systematically the one-on-one engagements are the ones that that yield the best results. You know, where people feel that they can really open up, and there's a moment of you know, really having that kind of meaningful conversation. That for sure is the one that works the best. The big gatherings, they're good for morale, but I'm not sure they're necessarily, you know, advanced. You know, like kind of the trust. Making an effort in giving a little speech in Japanese, obviously, you know, makes them back to that point. Okay, is she here to stay, kind of thing. You know, like gives them that, you know, confidence that I'm committed. You know, so it's those things work. I've been trying to also demystify a little bit my role. You've said 2 or 3 times already, wow, that's a big job, you know. And so how do you kind of bring it down to a level that people can understand and resonates with them and what it means, what I'm trying to do, and etc. So I've got this, I call it +1. So whenever I've got an external engagement where it's appropriate to bring a +1, then I bring typically a more junior member of the team with me to get them to experience what you know, my life is like, what these engagements look like, demystified executive life a little bit. Just get to see a bit of a behind the scenes. So I think it's the cumulative effect of many different things, and also staying the course, not just doing one thing and then okay, that didn't work. I want, you know, do the first one and then the second one, and then some things become a little bit more second nature.
And thinking about, you mentioned culture earlier too. I mean, you have Fujitsu culture, you have then, I guess, international culture, Japanese culture, and then you have LoRa culture. You know, like all of us, we create the work environment that we like, you know, that we think is the best, and the one we feel is the most appropriate and the most transformational or whatever, most authentic. And it really is a reflection of our values and what we think. So generally speaking, culture build has to correspond, though, to Japanese culture. You can't just be Laura from Mars who's going to do it a different way and everyone else fit in. That isn't going to happen. So you've got to fit in with Japanese culture. And you've got Fujitsu culture global. So it's got to fit in with that. You can't, you know, you start going off on a tangent, you'll be out of a job fairly shortly. So there's a few layers to that, but still you have control over what's going on. What have you found worked well for you so far to build a culture that you think is the most effective?
Well, I think you've touched on perhaps the most important thing that you shouldn't do, which is like to build your culture, you know, the culture that works for you, because the culture has to work ultimately for the team. And what works for the team today might look different in 6 months, in 12 months. There's internal factors, you know, the company, the transformation of the company. There's external factors, what happens in the world that might require a different level of agility, for example, you know, there's many things. So first and foremost, to have that kind of awareness that you're going to need to kind of flex a little bit. I'm definitely a minority. I mean, I don't know how many Italians we have in Fujitsu. We don't have a presence in Italy, so we are definitely a handful. So I wouldn't I wouldn't try and impose anything from from Italian culture necessarily. But I think what I've learned from moving around the world is that you have to take the best things and kind of make them your own and carry them forward. So I try to do the same here. There's a lot of good stuff here in Japan. So it's not about coming in from the outside and trying to impose things, like there are, we were talking about innovation. I think you've got a lot of talent and a lot of innovative minds here. So how do you get it out? They're wonderful executors. I mean, the precision of execution here is that, literally I don't have to worry about anything once, the machine is going. So there's all of these things. They're all part of our culture, as a team, first and foremost. That's where you have the biggest influence. And then you kind of, I would go, team, and then the Fujitsu culture, and then the Japanese culture, if you were following that line and trying to pick the best elements. And importantly, providing a lot of context to the Japanese team members and to the ones outside Japan, because that helps really understand why people do things or why they need to do things in a certain way. I found that helps building a common language, so to speak, that helps us then build the culture that we want.
I remember years ago when I was in Brisbane living there, I attended a talk by a guy who had a rock quarry, and they were sending big slabs of rocks for buildings and whatever to Japan. And this is the days of faxes, and he used to get these faxes from Japan, and they'd have a stamp on them in English, urgent. And one day, he was quite a clever guy. He thought, I don't even have a stamp in English with urgent on it, but these Japanese don't even speak English. They've got an urgent stamp. And that's the difference of expectation assumption. The Japanese expect you're not going to be quick enough. We work fast, hard in Japan. You're foreigners, you're going to be too slow in responding. If I put the urgent stamp on it, I'm more likely to get the answer I want when I need it. So, those sorts of expectations are quite interesting, aren't they? And so if you think about the culture of when you talk about Fujitsu outside of Japan, if they don't understand how decision-making works here, they're going to be frustrated. Why is it taking so long to get clarity on this? Why are we not getting a decision on this? What's going on? So that contextual part, both ways, also is a critical part, isn't it? If someone rang you up, Laura, and said, hey, Laura, I've been given this big job in Japan. I'm going to be running the company in Japan. You know Japan. You've been living there for years. How could I be an effective leader in Japan? What advice would you give them?
Well, first and foremost, I would say, brilliant, go for it. Then maybe we can preempt my answer. Well, I would say, I think I kind of hinted already at some of this. I would say be patient, because you're going to come here with your mandate, and whatever the mandate is, you're going to know that you have a limited period of time. Usually you come on an assignment for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, however long. So, your mindset will be, I'm going to go there and be effective and fast. And the reality is
hit the ground running. I think is the right terminology.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. It ain't going to happen.
Straight off the tarmac, into the office, change everything.
Yeah, not quite like that. I think in Japan, I always think about, if you've renovated a house, you always think, I'm going to do 3 months is my budget, done. And then you have to add 6 months and probably 30% of the budget. It's kind of similar experience in Japan. So, try and think about it that way. The second thing is that inevitably you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So be prepared to be wrong, to make mistakes, and ready to apologize, not to upset people. I think that's really important.
And that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I think in a lot of Western cultures, people, through fear of litigation or legal accountability, responsibility, are sort of in a way trained to not take responsibility and not own up to mistakes. There's sort of resistance to it. In some cultures. I'm thinking one particular culture, which you can easily imagine which one I'm talking about. But so that is the difference, though, in Japan, of actually saying, well, look, I was wrong, and admitting it, and saying, well, I screwed that up. I didn't get that right. And I think from a Japanese perspective, that's respected. That's thought to be, you're a person of, values, and you're not afraid to admit you're wrong, and you're not trying to tell us you're Mr. or Miss Perfect. I can relate more to you as a human being than you trying to be some god which you're not.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Yeah. What else?
But also I think it's important because I think here they will immediately go into almost like a shared responsibility mode. And I had an instance last week, and I was talking to my HR business partner, and she said, "Oh, I guess we made a mistake." And I said, "No, I made a mistake. I mean, like you've got nothing to do with this, so I need to manage it because it was my mistake. And I said the wrong thing. I need to rectify." So I think it's important because otherwise, I'm all for shared responsibility when we're working as a team, but sometimes it is your mistake to own. So it's so that's the second one. The final one I would say, which might seem a little bit counterintuitive, is just stay true to yourself, because that authenticity that I was referring to earlier goes a long way. So when you make a mistake, if people know that you're making it because you're trying to do something and you mean well, etc., then you will also be forgiven. That there will be a more perhaps emotional connection. I don't know how to describe it, but something that connects a kind of more like a human nature level. So don't try and kind of mold yourself into Japan too much, because otherwise it's what's your value?
There's always a line there, though, isn't there, between being an authentic bully from a Japanese viewpoint or an authentic pain from a Japanese viewpoint and being authentic with yourself. So there's some friction there, isn't there?
Yeah.
I'll be myself, everyone. I'm not going to adjust to Japan. I'm going to be me. And then you just crash and burn because you're not getting that cooperation. People are not delivering. Maybe white-handing, we call that in Australia. White-handing means sabotaging you. Mm-hmm. That can go on too. So there's a bit of a line there, isn't there?
Yeah. But common sense also helps.
Yeah,
a bit of self-reflection.
People skills are always a good thing to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what would be your definition of leadership?
I'm not a huge fan of definitions, textbook definitions. So I brought a little prompt today, which is SALT. So I mentioned that a year ago we did a leadership team workshop, and so as an icebreaker, we asked everybody to come in with what was their leadership symbol. And it was a really good way of starting the meeting. Gave me a lot of insight into people, what makes them tick. And if somebody chooses a surfboard, that gives you already.
And
if they didn't bring a surfboard, they brought a picture of a surfboard. But it gives you a sense of where they're coming from, from as leaders. And so I brought salt as my leadership symbol. Salt is one of those ingredients in cooking that if you put too much, you spoil the dish. If there's not enough, it doesn't taste right. So leadership is kind of similar. You have to find that balance. We talked a lot about that today.
When you had the salt there, the first thing came into my mind was salt is used for purification in Japan. When you see the sumo, that white stuff they're throwing in the ring, that's salt. When you've been to a funeral, you come home, you have to throw salt on each other to purify from having been to the funeral. There's a lot of Shinto belief in this sense where salt fits in. So I was immediately thinking purification. I thought maybe you're hitting the president with some salt or something to purify.
There's a little bit of that in leadership as well, I guess. But you might or might not know that Japan has got over 700 producers of salt of this big island. Lots of seawater. Over 1,500 different types of salt, but what they don't have is this, which is Sardinian salt. So this is something that I brought from my own my hometown. So nice. The message to the team was, as well as salt and in the right amount, was it was the first time that I was truly leading a global team. So I wanted them to give me the benefit of the doubt that maybe I could bring something that, even if they had plenty of in Japan, they didn't have this particular kind of salt. So
thinking about females, leadership, Japan, any advice you'd have for female executives or female staff who are thinking about putting their hand up or trying to take on leadership roles? What would you say to encourage them?
Well, first and foremost, put your hand up. That's probably the first bit of advice. I think there's too much hesitation and too much self-censoring happening. The second thing, I always encourage people to also have an experience outside Japan, because I found that, especially with a certain kind of group, that it helps them build that confidence. So that's kind of something else.
So what you're talking about there is trying to get a position,
an assignment,
assignment, transfer overseas, work there for a while, come back.
Yeah, exactly. Because I found, especially with female employees, they've done that. They come back and you could see they're much more confident. We talked a little bit about culture, and culture ultimately is a, sets of behaviors, but those behaviors change a little bit when you're in a different context in a different country. So it helps people come out of their shell a little bit, and also don't. There's a little bit of hesitation here in Japan. I hear, that women don't want to be treated differently. They want to have the same, same opportunity as their male colleagues. I've got a slightly different view. I think, if we want to accelerate, we need to zoom in on female leaders and build that confidence that will help them in their career. So, but number one, raise your hand.
In terms of, you talked about, I don't know whether it's a percentage quota system or not, but Fujitsu has a goal, KPI. So they have made a decision that, okay, we're going to look at changing our complexion of leaders away from just being men to being a more mix. Have they set a percentage of how many female leaders they want?
Yes,
it's 30%. Seems to be a magic number.
Yeah, 30%.
And what have you found has worked well to actually have ladies decide that I'm going to be part of that 30%? Because often, if they've got aged parents, there's a lot of pressure to take care of them. If they've got kids, take care of the kids. It could be pressure from their mother-in-law about, your job is to be, taking care of the husband, not having their own career. There's all sorts of societal constraints on them to step out and be part of that 30%. And also, I guess there's that fear of stepping out. Any Japanese person basically is taught, don't step out, be part of the group, stay part of the herd, don't be an individual, blend in. So there's a lot of cultural things against that too. So how do you, in Fujitsu, what have you found works well to help ladies to actually make that transition?
I don't think we found the magic formula, Greg. I would lie if I said otherwise. And I think we are all on the journey, like certainly all Japanese companies to try and achieve that. What we find is most effective is when you start early, when you start kind of planting that seed, early on in women's careers, instead of starting at a certain point where all those pressures are much more acute, where you've got family, when you've got aging parents, the sandwich, as they call it in Germany. So I would say start much earlier. Obviously, it's going to take time to see the outcome of those efforts, but that's where we see the bigger numbers, if you like.
Yeah, DEI has become politicized as a terminology. We still call it DEI. Maybe we should change the name, I don't know. But one of the issues we found when DEI first became something that Japanese companies were looking at, they would ask us to train the women. And I'd say, well, yes, of course, we can do that. But what about the men? Are you thinking about training them? Because they're the bosses. They're the ones who, coach, who encourage, who promote, who give assignments to help people grow, to give people responsibilities to, transform themselves. What about training these guys as well? And it didn't sort of click at first, but then gradually it started. And then they were it was very frustrating, So, yes, we've done DI. Oh, yeah, what did you do? Oh, we had an hour and a half, hour and a half seminar on this or that. And it's like, really? That's it? That's all you did? Did you get any diversity with that? No. So it tends to become, in Japanese, we call it tatemae, type of superficial reality rather than actual reality. And so the companies are sort of genuflecting in the general direction of DI, but not actually doing anything meaningful. So what have we found is actually meaningful to help, position women to succeed as leaders?
Well, as I said, I don't think there is one thing. You have to come at it from lots of different angles. In some cases, also working on the male population of your organization. But I think there's also an expectation that you're gonna switch, flick a switch and it's all gonna change. And there's generation of people that have to go through that process, for the change to actually be seen. So. I wouldn't be able to point out, like something that is working particularly well, other than, a number of different things that you're doing. Commitment from the the leadership teams, because then you've got the commitment from the top.
And that when you talk about commitment from the top, one of the things is, if your kid is sick, the husband doesn't leave the company and go and pick the kid up. It's usually the mother. So she's the one working out early, or she's the one who needs to leave early to pick the kids up from juku or school or whatever they're doing, right? Usually, rather than the male. So the company has to have a culture that is acceptant of that, because if it's not, it's incredible peer societal pressure to leave early when everyone else is still working, and you go and feel that you can go. So those sorts of things, again, this is where, if the culture of the company is going home early, picking up the kids, picking up sick kids is acceptable, paternity leave is acceptable, whatever it might be, support the mothers when they have children, that makes a big difference. So, have you seen that in Fujitsu? Do they have these sorts of support mechanisms to boost that?
Yes, and I think the biggest game changer has been COVID, actually, ironically, because it's kind of forced the whole population, certainly for us, into a different work dynamic. So hybrid work has helped a lot, because
so you still have hybrid work here.
Yes, and we're not coming back. Yeah, we're not coming back full time. So we come to the office 2 to 3 times a week. Usually, it's where for those meaningful moments when we go workshops and meetings that we want to do face to face. But actually, that has created a lot more flexibility in the organization. And during COVID, I've seen, colleagues that just had babies, showing them on, on screen. And, I had a meeting last week with one of my peers who, said, sorry for cancelling last time. My kid fell and I had to go and pick him up at E&E. So I think all of that is becoming definitely more, well, I don't know if it's a Fujitsu thing, for us it's not as unusual to see or to hear. So perhaps a little bit of a momentum, with the changes that a pandemic brought. That's a positive of a very tough time.
Tough time. Yeah. Well, Laura, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate you joining us today. So, join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.